Hello everyone, welcome back to Alkaline Hydroxide 784, and today in the GP overview series we'll be looking at nutritional science. I did say I would cover this topic eventually in a previous episode, so yeah, cool. But mostly I just want to tell you about all of the challenges it is facing right now, and yeah, especially it is because of misinformation, of course. But I'll also tell you about its users and benefits before we go into that deep end of the sea and go into the misinformation part of it. But the reason that I particularly mentioned misinformation is because I've read about it, I've seen videos about it, and I just seem to know a lot about the misinformation part of it. So why not share it with all of you? Because I think it's quite helpful to know about like the misinformation that can spread in nutrition, because not really due to nutritional science itself, but because of many other factors. So yeah, like before we actually go to that part of it, let's look at the good stuff, aka the users of nutritional science. So in terms of jobs, like what people usually think of are the sports nutritionists and the general nutritionists or like dietitians, those kind of people. So sports nutritionists are those who help athletes get the nutrition they need to perform better in their sports. And this is actually quite a thing because in different sports have different kinds of requirements. Some are more endurance, and some of them are more like high performance. And for that, you need different diets to help you be like have the most optimal performance in your sports. But since I have no knowledge about how those things work, I'm not going to talk about that in greater detail. Apart from just tell you that that's what they do. That's what they're charge of. I mean, yeah. So if we look at the other side of things, which is the general nutritionist or like the dietitian, they're kind of like the people you can see in a hospital appointment or something like that. I guess like you have an appointment and you can go and meet them, and they're usually there for people who requires or if they want to have a dietary plan, they can go and meet one of those specialists to get a dietary plan. But in terms of who requires it, usually it will be recommended for maybe obese or overweight patients, or it could be recommended for people who have certain dietary allergens or certain autoimmune responses to food. Like for example, if you have a uh, Crohn's syndrome or something, they can't really eat gluten or something. Yeah, like stuff like that. Basically, if you have some trouble with eating certain kinds of food, then you can get a dietary plan to help you still get the required nutrition you need without like while avoiding the thing that you cannot eat in the sense. And also for those who have deficiencies and wish to correct it without having to take a lot of pills or anything like that, so they can get to know what kinds of foods will help them correct the deficiency. Yeah, so what they will do is they will look through what you can or cannot eat. They'll take into consideration your dietary requirements, your religious considerations maybe, or your current lifestyle as well. Because if you're sedentary versus if you're active, or like how sedentary or active you are, or like what kinds of stuff you do, yeah, that kind of thing. And sometimes they may even consider your gut microbiome, because actually the gut microbiome can influence a lot of what you can eat, or at least what will help you feel better when you eat it. Because sometimes if the food that you eat cannot be digested properly by your microbiome, aka the bacteria, you end up feeling quite miserable. So yeah, like it can give digestion issues or something like that. Right. So apart from this kind of a job, there are other places in which you can do a job after learning nutritional science and stuff like that. For example, if there's like a food company, they will need someone to help advise them. If let's say they want to increase the nutritional value of their food or something, they can get someone to help them figure out how to do that. Or in farming as well, maybe you wanna, I don't know, make your vegetables more healthy or something, like through breeding or something like that. Maybe they might be of use. Or generally like food science related stuff, or even if it's not human food, it can even be for animal nutrition. So like your pet food, maybe there's someone who's helping to make sure it satisfies what your pet requires. So they're actually quite useful, and we kind of need them. And apart from those kind of professions, you can also see it in research. So nutritional science in general has helped to improve our quality of life and help us as a species be more aware of what we're eating in general. So for example, we know that vitamin C prevents scurvy. Everyone knows the story of that, I guess. But the reason why we know it is because someone actually wanted to find out what caused scurvy, and then they figured out, oh, it's vitamin C. And yeah, they did it out at sea. Yeah, such a joke. Okay. And we also know that coffee isn't actually dangerous and is pretty helpful for many people. Of course, the thing is, in the past, people did believe that coffee was dangerous, and there was even bans on it. And the only reason why it's a thing now is because people were still rebels. So yeah, I'll tell you more about that later. And of course, we know that literally anything, even water, can be toxic if you take too much of it. So that's the easiest nutritional advice, and I can probably give you: do not eat too much of anything. Although the meaning of too much depends on what the thing is. So yeah. And we also know the importance of making sure that our food and our water is hygienic, because that's also kind of important. Not just what nutrients are there in it, but also what bacteria and pathogens are there on that food or water. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's considered nutritional science, but it's kind of related, so it is important stuff still. So apart from these kinds of things, it also helps us find ways to improve the food as well. So maybe like allow us to preserve it for a longer time, or allow us to fortify, like for example, fortified cereals or fortified grains, or other kinds of uses that we require nutritional science to help us in order to make sure our food stays longer, is fresher, and works the best for us in the sense. Yeah. So that's the usefulness of nutritional science. But for all of the benefits nutritional science has brought, it is also quite riddled with many challenges. And it's not because of nutritional science itself, but because of many other factors and the whole uncertainty of research in general. So the main challenge here is actually misinformation. And this is my favorite part of the episode, where I get to talk about misinformation. Yeah, so what do I mean by misinformation, you might be wondering? Well, you could take a look at any news headline or nutritional related, nutrition research or something in the news, and more often than not, it seems like some very important life-changing discovery has been made, or at least something that you need to suddenly change in your life in order to avoid a certain disease. However, the reality is that the way that the newspapers actually tell the information makes it seem more important than it actually is, in a sense. Like, the newspapers tend to over-represent the information. And I guess I should give you an example, although I have a feeling this example isn't really the best example. But there's been, I think, most of our newspapers aren't too crazy about the headlines, and they're quite neutral-ish in the sense they just tell what the research paper did. But some of the tabloids and those kinds of newspapers might be a bit more sensational about it in a sense. So let's look at this example, which I'll give you a CNA article, but I'm pretty sure you can find other newspapers covering the same thing. And it's about this research paper, and the title in the CNA article is let me open it. Okay, so in the CNA article, it says that consumption of sugary drinks linked with cancer risk. So that's what it says. And if you're someone who doesn't think further than what you read, at face value, you're suddenly going to be like, oh no, that means I cannot drink any more Coca-Cola, cannot drink any more fruit juice, cannot drink anything else except water. Well, that's not the case. I mean, the link with cancer risk may be actually more overstated in the title than it really is. You know what I mean? So it mentions this study that that found that sugary drinks were somewhat linked to a higher risk of getting cancer. And of course, CNA isn't as crazy as some of the tabloids and all that. So it is actually the best way of them saying the news title. Although I feel like a better way to represent it would be a study, like it was linked with cancer risks, but the actual impact is, like it doesn't mean that all of it is definitely 100% true, that kind of thing. But it's a bit hard to represent that in a news article. I understand that. So if you look at this website that I found, the British Nutrition Foundation, they actually covered that very news, and it tells us in a greater detail what exactly happened. It says, it's from a cohort study carried out in France, and it had 101,000 adults, and they didn't have cancer at baseline and were followed for 5 years. And the main important thing to note is that they do mention what the study suggests. That they say the results suggest that the observed effect was is that sugary drinks increases your cancer risk. But at the next paragraph says is that they conclude that there's the World Cancer Research Fund conclude that there isn't a real direct link between the sugary drinks and cancer risk, and it is more of an indirect link, because if you drink too much sugary drinks, you end up becoming, you get weight gain, or you get diabetes or stuff like that, and that can increase your risk of cancer in some way. So just normally drinking a sugary drink wouldn't give you cancer, but if you overdo it, then you get it. So as usual, the main advice is just don't overdo anything. That's the easiest thing I can say. Yeah, so as you realize, the newspaper, like if you were to literally just read the newspaper headline at face value, then you'll just be panicking immediately. But if you look at the deeper sense of the article, you realize, wait, actually I don't need to panic. It's just I'm not gonna do anything that will bring it to that extent. Unless you're the person who does do it to that extent, then maybe you should consider not doing that to that extent, I guess. Right, so where was I? Where's my script? Okay, so why is this the case? Why is it that in news articles and stuff like that, we see a headline that sounds more important than the actual thing is? Well, what the news people usually do wrong is that they just read the conclusion of the report, or they just read the stats in a very wrong way. Like they just look at it at a very face value kind of method. And sometimes even the researchers themselves kind of accidentally write the conclusion in a very significant manner, which might mislead the newspaper writers, the newspaper the writers basically to write articles that suggest something more important than it actually is. And since I don't want you all to suffer the same fate of misreading the information in a research study, let's go for a stats 101 lesson. Okay, I'll keep it quick. I know no one really likes stats, but it is important after all. So let's say we have this graph, and there's a bunch of data on this graph. So you want to, this is one of the things that you can consider. This is about interpolation versus extrapolation. So if you already learned H2 maths, you probably know what I'm going to talk about. So they found this bunch of data on the graph, and now if, let's say, you have two different sets of points, and you wanted to find out what will happen in another 10 years. So this data is from maybe 5 years, and then you want to find out what happens at 10 years. However, you don't have any data from 5 to 10. So if you were to literally just draw your linear regression line and then just continue it until 10 years, you realize that the line goes above 100%. And that doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense that the line goes above 100%. And this is because you're doing extrapolation. So we cannot predict accurately what will happen after 5 years. So in reality, this could be a logarithmic graph, and just that this part is more linear, and then as it goes up, it may become a plateau or something like that. And wait, is it logarithmic? What am I saying? Okay, like it's probably one of those plateauing graphs rather than a completely linear graph. So likewise, likewise in any statistics paper or any data that you see, you should be a little bit careful to not extrapolate the risk that you see in that particular study or in any study for that matter. So yeah. And also like the fact that they, like, even if they do it for 5 years, which is actually a pretty long period of time, it doesn't mean that in the 5 years it is literally that particular factor that has led to the end result. So in other words, correlation doesn't equal causation. In reality, nutritional science is quite hard to study precisely because there's many factors. Humans are complicated things. They do all kinds of stuff. Like, it's not like they only do one bad thing and then everything else is good. It's really hard to find people like that. So since there's many factors, and even if they are the kind of person who only does one bad thing, even the good things that they do can have an effect, right? Like the amount of good thing that they do can have an effect on how bad the bad thing will be. So there's too many factors to consider here. And it's more of like you have to evaluate multiple factors at the same time, which is quite hard to do. Right, so that is one aspect. And apart from the way the information is presented, we had to consider the methodology used and the controls, if any, that were used in the study. So the devil's in the details, as they say. So I just have this list of things to consider, which maybe will help you the next time you are confused by a nutritional science study. So the first thing you need to consider is the number of people / the demographics of people studied. As we all know, maybe if, let's say I can drink milk very easily, but maybe someone in China might not be able to drink milk because they're lactose intolerant. So the effect of the milk on me and someone in China, or like whoever is lactose intolerant for that matter, would be quite different. And that's why it is important to know the demographics, or maybe to know certain, the differences in region of the people you're studying. If you only study like white people, for example, that doesn't mean you can definitely say the same thing will happen for a bunch of Asian people for that matter. Or if you only study like people from one country, it doesn't mean that the exact same thing will happen for people in literally the country next to it. No, it doesn't mean that in a sense. And even apart from location per se, you can look at age. Let's say if you only study like 18 to 25, obviously it's not the same thing as going to happen for a bunch of people who are 60 years. Of course, that's why most studies do study a huge age range, because that's easier to do compared to a location range. But the location range is the thing that usually presents a huge problem in some of these studies, because they focus on very specific groups of people. Yeah. So that is one thing to consider, which is the people who they study, or the number of people for that matter, because as big as you can get your sample group, you really need a huge sample group. For example, the study that I was mentioning just now, for the example, used 100,000 people. And if you're using only 1,000 people, obviously that is not enough, people for your evidence to be like somewhat validated in a sense. It is only more of help you to do further research into the topic. So that is one thing to consider. So the second thing to consider is the dosage of whatever that you're giving them, or the dosage that they are using it themselves. So this would not necessarily be for the sugary drinks per se, but for other experiments where they feed certain substances to rats or mice, and then they check whether they have adverse reaction to that substance. So maybe for like carcinogenic substances or something like that. So in those experiments, they usually use quite pure forms of the substance, and the thing is, they tend to use quite high dosages of that substance as well. Dosages that humans may never even reach in their daily lives. So if there is a reaction from that huge amount of stuff, that means that it doesn't mean anything. it doesn't help us to do anything about what we are doing every day, because the dosage that they gave is so high that it is not relevant to what people, consume every day. And therefore you would only get some useful information if they were to do it at that same, dosage level for human beings as it is to mice, in a sense. And if in that case nothing happens, then it means to some extent it probably nothing happens for humans as well, because even though they're doing it on mice, it doesn't mean you can definitely say that the exact same thing happens for humans as well. So you have to be a bit careful with that as well. If they're not doing it on humans, then you definitely cannot be 100% sure of what is the exact reaction of that substance in humans. Right, so that is the dosage of things used. So the third factor that we would consider is the methodology itself. So most importantly, you need to have a control, because the control is quite important. And what kind of control it is it a placebo, is it like another treatment or a similar substance, or is it some other kind of control? And how long was the experiment actually done for? So here, for example, 5 years, or it could be less than 5 years, could be more than 5 years. As you can see, these things take a long time to do. That's why it's quite hard to do nutritional science research, and we gotta appreciate those people who do it. It takes very long to finish. So the methodology itself is quite important. So how they're going about doing it, in the sense, yeah. And then the next factor to consider is the analysis method. So the analysis method would be how you analyze the results. So earlier I did mention about the stats 101, interpolation versus extrapolation, but that's not the only thing I would be concerned about, but more of how you would interpret the results that you get. So even if you did interpolation and then you say, okay, this, like, or you can just say the general trend from in this period of time is that higher sugary drinks seems to lead to higher cancer. Does that mean that sugary drinks is literally the reason for it, or is there other reasons for it? So the analysis will have to take into consideration all the other factors as well. It has to take into consideration how controlled the experiment was. It has to take into consideration whether all of the research subjects actually followed through with the instructions that they have, or whatever measurements that they need to do. So this is actually quite important, because I remember there was this epidemiology course, like a very quick one, and in that they did mention that they usually measure it in terms of watch hours, like subject hours, rather than the subjects itself. Precisely because some people might leave halfway through the study and then they cannot use the number of people, and instead they have to use the amount of time that they got from all of the people and then divide it by that. So it's a bit of a finicky process, and we had to understand that as well, and also know how they analyze the results. So that's the analysis method is quite important in that sense. And finally, and most importantly, is it peer reviewed? So if it is reviewed, you're more likely to trust that it is somewhat legit, or at least that they did the experiment properly, and then just come up with some random numbers and say, oh, look at this is our experiment. You know what I mean? So at least you should definitely take note of whether it is peer reviewed. And even more than just it being peer reviewed, is it something that other people have also studied? So because sometimes even if it is definitely peer reviewed and they endorse it, it could be a fluke still. It could just be some weird circumstance that led to a fluke, that maybe in this certain group of people it seems like the sugary drinks increase cancer, but it may not be the case in all of the studies in another study that is of the same nature. So it is possible that it could be a fluke. So you need to have more than one study on the same thing. And that's why there are some people who do mega analyses. So they look through many research papers on the same topic, and then they come up with a conclusion based on that. So that's why it's important to have many people studying the exact same thing. Even though it seems time consuming and all that, it's kind of important in order to make sure that the results are reproducible, or like the conclusion is reproducible to some extent. So yeah, if you're into this field, actually, if you're interested in nutritional science or if you're interested in research in general, I think you should be a bit more aware of all these factors to consider. So apart from the newspapers and stuff, like where else does your confusing information come off? Well, of course, we have those boomers to do it for us. Or at least the people who go around forwarding messages in WhatsApp and even in Facebook. Yes, Facebook still exists, if you didn't know that already. So, like, all these messages can be confusing. Maybe you don't care about them, so it's not for you, but it can be confusing for your parents or grandparents who may follow the advice that they see on a random WhatsApp message or Facebook post. And maybe you might, like, you may not believe what's on the particular message. You might still be affected because your parent or grandparent might ask you to follow what's on that message. And, that's pretty frustrating, right? Like, you don't really want to do it. But anyways, rumors spreading in this manner is so very effective. And I think I have an explanation for it because, if you want, you can listen to it. So in the old days, before smartphones and even before widespread usage of computers, people were like, in small little communities, like, imagine it like a kampong or a small village, and they usually like share their health or nutritional advice to each other. Like their friends are like, everyone knows everyone else in the village, so they just happily share whatever they know, whatever they think is helpful for each other, and they'll tell, okay, maybe this thing is good for you, you should probably take it, that kind of thing. So everyone kind of trusts everyone else to tell information that is helpful to them, especially even if it's health information, they can trust their friend to tell them. But and even more so, I think the bigger reason is because this knowledge is something that they learn from their grandparents, or like over time, like it is like tried and tested kind of information, so they kind of trust it. And I kind of get it, so they get that they trust this information and it makes sense. But if we go a few decades forward until today, we see that, like a lot of things have changed. But the one thing that hasn't is their willingness to believe this stuff. Or at least not everyone, but some people tend to still believe something that's been sent to them, even though the message literally has the word forwarded on top of it, and even though they don't even know where it came from originally, they just happily trust it and then they send it to someone else. Yeah, you get the point. So the trust is still there, but the actual usefulness of the message is not there anymore. Like, it's just some random troll message from some person who just wanted to spread something around. And this is my explanation. If you want to verify it, you can verify it. Yeah, but please don't forward this explanation to anyone. I think it'll be quite boring. Right, so luckily for us, we have a little something called Snopes and other similar fact-checking websites. So they're probably the only way that we can tell our family members that is what, like, the actual information that they got is not accurate. And there's there's actually a correction to whatever they got, or maybe it's completely false or something like that. So, it's good to have these fact-checking websites around so that we can actually, fight against the misinformation. Right, so another source of potential misinformation, wherever it may come from, but usually it's from YouTube and random blog articles, is, diet advice. And the reason why I say potential and not just say misinformation is that there is some truth to it, I guess. There is some truth to each diet, but the real problem is actually whether the diet would work for you personally. And the general issue, because of, like, that problem is because of the fact that people don't know enough information rather than from misinformation. So what that means is that people do not bother researching more about a diet, or like how you must actually do the diet, and are likely to just try it once and then, like, oh, this sounds like a great idea, and then they just try it without really doing any actual research on it. So, you can imagine it like, okay, so you see this new fad diet and then you're like, oh, let's do it, and then you don't even think about the considerations and stuff like that, because the thing is, actually some diets can be quite problematic for some people. and you end up either not being able to keep up with it, or you actually face other problems like deficiencies or digestion issues because of the gut microbiome stuff. Yeah. So as someone who has read and watched many a thing about why diets fail, not that I really care about diets though, so yeah, I'll just tell you why in case just want to give you some thumbs up before you do anything. Right. So the reason why they generally fail is because, people just want to go and do the diet, and then they just enforce it on themselves too much and too quickly, such that they end up wanting to give up because it's so hard for them to follow. So it's like they make too many changes at one go. It's like they just dive right into the deep end of the sea instead of going through the shallow end of the sea. And instead, the better way to do this is to do it like a little bit by a little bit. Make one small change at a time. That will be the best way to go about doing a diet. So for example, if you want to eat less sugar or something, you don't just immediately cut out all sources of sugar, but instead, maybe just eat one lesser item at a time, which is a much more doable thing. So that's one reason why people usually fail at diets. And the other one would be that they don't actually take their lifestyle into consideration. So let's say if you're a sedentary person, you may not need a lot of energy-rich food, so you shouldn't follow something that promotes a lot of energy-rich food if you don't need that much energy. And you would probably need something that is more of nutrient-based kind of foods. Or if you exercise a lot, like on the other side, like if you're the one who has a very high metabolism, or you exercise a lot, then you may need that sufficient energy, and you cannot like skimp on the energy-rich food just because it's a diet. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you must take your lifestyle into consideration as well. And the third one is on the diet's nutritional value. So people don't assess the nutritional value of the diet in a sense, and they may end up avoiding food that are actually important for them. And because they avoid certain foods, they end up getting a deficiency in a certain nutrient or vitamin. And of course, we have the microbiome. So sometimes things just don't work well with you. So if you do have digestion issues, then stop doing that. Like, to go back to what you were doing normally, so that you won't, because digestion issues are pretty irritating. So yeah, just like there are some food that probably don't go well, so even if you wanted to eat it, it will be quite hard. And finally, where you live. Well, it is in a way good to eat stuff that is suitable for your climate where you geographically live, rather than just eat all the super exotic stuff, because generally it works better in a sense. Your body and your microbiome would be more adapted to stuff that is within the local climate. Of course, it's up to each person. Some people can eat really exotic things and still be okay. So yeah, that's up to you. Okay. So that's the reasons why like diets usually fail, and it's because of the lack of information, which ends up creating misinformation. Like, you create your own misinformation and it leads to problems. So apart from that, what else do we have? We have the boomer version of YouTube. Basically those wonderful TV shows like, the Dr. Oz show. I actually have no idea how accurate or trustable the information there is, even though it seems like, wow, there's so many great things that you can do. And also, but at the same time, it just seems so weird, like, who's gonna follow that advice? And yeah, since I don't know whether I can trust the information, and I don't think you would know either, you should probably do your own research and evaluate whether you actually need to do that one thing that they tell on TV just because it seems like a good thing, you know what I mean? So just do fact check it. Also think of whether it's relevant to you specifically. If not, then don't bother. Yeah, it's sometimes good to just go with the usual everyday thing that you already do, because that's the thing you're most comfortable with, and you only need to make changes if you really feel the need to make a change, or if it's really or if you're doing something that is actually quite bad. So yeah. And even though you might say maybe those people are actually experts, like the people on TV, well, sometimes an expert opinion may not be the best advice. Like, it could be a good advice sometimes because it is like a tried and tested advice, maybe, for example, but it may not always be the best advice. And rather than just blindly trusting anyone, even if it's an expert, you should try to form your own opinion on a product by seeing whether it is tested multiple times and by multiple people, because I would feel that kind of a thing is more trustworthy than something that's just randomly recommended by some person on the internet or on TV. And apart from people on TV, where else do we get misinformation? Okay, I guess this one is more of an advertising tactic, which is by the companies. So it is how they label their products, and it is usually mandated by FDA or for, I guess here the AVA, I guess. Yeah, so basically all the people, like the people who are in charge of mandating food stuff and everything, they probably will mandate the labeling of products as well. And in general, the companies tend to over glorify their products in terms of health value, because people like products that seem healthy and still taste good, so they just make their product look like it's very healthy even though it's not that great. It's like that kind of healthiness. And we saw this last time in the advertising episode, so you know what I'm talking about. And the thing is, apparently there's some products that aren't very effective or not that great actually, but they're still allowed to market themselves as, wow, you're very great, just because it is safe. In a sense, they're still safe, but so they just like have false advertising in a sense. And this is more of in places like the US. Right, so yeah, I talked way too much about misinformation. So apart from that, what are the other challenges? Well, it's kind of similar to the things that allow misinformation to happen in the first place, which is the fact that everyone is different. So like if everyone was like exactly the same, right, it would be quite easy to get information. Like you don't need to worry so much about so many factors. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of factors. There's so many complicated factors. And since everyone is different, even if you don't look at race or location or anything else, our habits are different, our food preferences are different, our DNA is different. Like everyone's DNA is slightly different. So we have the differences that we can see in the gut microbiome in terms of DNA itself, which you would be talking about the SNPs, the single nucleotide polymorphisms, yeah, those things. And also the adaptation to certain foods, like a group of people might be eating this food for a very long time, so they're okay with it, but another group of people has never eaten the food, and when they start eating it, they suddenly face problems. It's possible. So there is that case that there's a lot of differences between people. And also, and another challenge is that it's hard to do experiments for. It is quite like doing pharmaceutical experiments. You need a lot of time, you need a lot of people, you need a lot of like work in order to actually get the research out. And as I mentioned, you need like 100,000 people at least to do a proper study, and you need to do it for at least 5 years or 10 years or even longer than that. And you need to like really do a lot of admin work and really properly account all the results down, and also take note of all the other factors that people are doing. Like maybe if you're looking at one factor, whether they drink sugary drinks, for example, then you have to take into account what all the other things that people do, like do they smoke, do they drink, do they eat certain foods more than other foods, do they exercise, yeah, do they sleep enough. There's so many things to account for, and even if you account for all of those, there could be one thing that you didn't even think of. So yeah, it is quite hard to do an experiment for this. And even if you do the experiment successfully, it's not enough. You need another such experiment of that same scale and magnitude, and maybe a different group of people, just to help compare over different regions, for example. And even then, it may not be fully done. You need to keep doing many experiments to solidly confirm something. Yeah, and finally, public opinion and companies. So that's another thing that is a challenge for nutritional science, because even if they do prove something that is revolutionary and actually important, something that you must definitely take note of, it might be hard to change public opinion. And even companies can be a part of creating that public opinion to begin with. For example, like companies made breakfast an important thing so that they can sell their breakfast cereals and stuff like that. and also other facts about food that are actually false. For example, carrots helping your eyesight. Maybe they might, but they're not like super great. Like they're not like wonder miracle kind of vegetables to help your eyesight. They just have a certain set of vitamins that are useful for you. So yeah. And also things like coffee became a thing, which I mentioned just now, like earlier on. The fact that coffee was actually banned in the old days, but the people continued using it because why not just use it? It doesn't seem like it do anything wrong, and now it's just a good thing, not a bad thing. And a similar thing is happening with a particular plant that could be used medically, but mostly recreationally, and it's banned in many countries. Well, I guess you know what I'm talking about. I don't need to tell it. So yeah, like there's certain things that people follow religiously and like follow literally, like they consider it quite a big thing, even though there's no actual research or anything done on that thing, because people think it's good, so they just do it. And it might be hard to change the opinion at that point. So that is basically all of the challenges that nutritional science faces. And yeah, that's it for today, I guess. So the conclusion is that nutritional science is very important. It is quite helpful for us as a species, and it helps us to maybe stay healthier and live longer. But at the same time, it has so many troubles that it's facing, which is especially from misinformation. And yeah, it's you have to be aware of those things in order to make sure that you don't feel super confused the next time you read one of those nutritional science studies, and just be a bit more educated in these kinds of things. Yeah. So I guess the video is a bit long now, so let's just conclude it here. I call it a day. And I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please press the like button and subscribe. And with that, I would like to say thank you and bye.